Hello everyone. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make the TNG style shoulder pads. The TNG era uniforms had raglan style shoulder padding, and some have said that they were standard retail shoulder pads. But even though I wasn't there, everything I've seen leads me to believe that they were custom made for the production. Even if they were retail pads, they would have been from the 80s and no longer available. Modern retail pads aren't nearly as big as we need for a proper TNG silhouette. Either way, for cosplaying and replica purposes, our best bet is just to make our own shoulder pads. These shoulder pads were used on the TNG jumpsuits, scants, Season 1 Admiral uniforms, early formal uniforms, Dr. Pulaski's medical smocks, and at least one of Wesley Crusher's sweaters. The wool jackets introduced in Season 3 also had a raglan-style silhouette, but they were structured and padded differently. Sewing patterns for most of the uniforms I just mentioned are available on my Tailors Gone Wild website, www.tailorsgonewild.com. Patterns for the others are coming as soon as I can get them to you. Anyway, there were at least two different styles of shoulder pads used on these uniforms. Generally speaking, an early style and a later style, and the men's shoulder pads were a bit larger than the women's. We'll start with the early shoulder pads. The early style shoulder pads are easier to make than the later ones. The pattern is an oval, with a dart to pull it into the final raglan shape. For the women's version, you'll need 2 cuts of lining and 2 layers of low-loft batting. The men's version is the same, except I suggest using 3 layers of batting. Trace the dart onto the lining layers and mark the shoulder seam with disappearing tailor's chalk. Trim the dart out of the batting layers. Sew the darts closed on the lining. Press the darts toward the front. On the batting layers, pull the edges of the dart together and zigzag stitch them together. Trim away about 3/4 of an inch from the second layer of batting all the way around. For the men's version, trim away a bit more toward the neck. Place one batting layer on top of the other, matching darts and shoulder seams. Anchor the batting layers together over the dart with another zigzag stitch. Sandwich the batting assembly between the 2 lining layers, matching darts and shoulder seams. Pin the layers together all the way around. I suggest pulling the bottom piece of lining slightly tighter to help pull the pad into shape. The edges won't quite line up, but that's fine. Using a quilting/walking foot, sew the shoulder pad closed 1/4 inch from the edge of the upper lining. Stitch again 1/8 of an inch outside the first row of stitching, 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Trim the edge of the pad with pinking shears like this. Or you can serge the edge of the pad if you have a serger. Steam the shoulder pad into shape over a tailor's ham. Hand sew a pair of small snaps to the pad, one close to the edge at the shoulder seam and another at the tip of the dart. Hand sew a corresponding pair of snaps to the shoulder seam allowances of your uniform. When attaching the pads, remember that the dart should angle toward the front. The later style shoulder pads are a bit more involved, and to be honest, even after studying a few screen-used pairs in person, I'm still not entirely sure how they were made or with what materials. However, the process I'm about to show you will still produce something pretty close. For the women's version, you'll need 2 shell layers, a layer of low-loft batting the size of the entire pad, a layer of heavy French canvas about 2/3 the size of the pad, a second layer of low-loft batting for the outer area of the pad, and a small cut of thick felt for the opposite area. The men's version is again similar, but the proportions are slightly different, and you'll probably want a third layer of batting for the outer area of the pad. You can use black lining for the shell fabric, but the screen-used pads I've seen were made out of something more durable. My best guess is polyester gabardine. Sew the darts closed on the shell layers. Press the darts toward the front. The women's later style pads are symmetrical, so either direction can be the front. Close the batting darts and join the layers like I already showed you for the early style pads. Sandwich the batting assembly between the heavy French canvas on top and the thick felt on bottom. From the top, pat stitch the layers together over the French canvas, gently pulling the assembly into its rounded shape. Trim the French canvas and felt away about 1/2 inch from the edges. Sandwich this assembly between the 2 shell layers, matching darts and shoulder seams. Pin the layers together all the way around. I again suggest pulling the bottom shell layer slightly tighter to help pull the pad into shape. Using a quilting/walking foot, sew the shoulder pad closed 1/4 inch from the edge of the upper lining. Stitch again 1/8 of an inch outside the first row of stitching, 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Trim the edge of the pad with pinking shears like this, or you can serge the edge of the pad if you have a serger. Steam the shoulder pad into shape over a tailor's ham. I think it's neat how these later style shoulder pads were more structured, but in my opinion, it's a lot more work for something that basically produces the same silhouette. Personally, I usually just make the early style shoulder pads for all the uniforms I mentioned, as well as the later TNG jumpsuits. If you're making a later style TNG jumpsuit, obviously it's up to you which type of shoulder pads you want to make for your costume. There are free sewing tutorials for most of the uniforms I mentioned earlier on my blog, www.StarTrekCostumeGuide.com. Like I mentioned earlier, sewing patterns for them are available at www.taylorsgonewild.com, both as physical copies and digital downloads. I've also put together an entire video walkthrough on how to make the TNG jumpsuits, which you can also get on the Taylors Gone Wild website. I don't know about you, but I'm a monkey see, monkey do kind of learner. The free tutorial on my blog is very thorough, with detailed instructions and dozens of photos, but I definitely learn best when somebody says, sew these 2 pieces together along this seam, and I get to actually watch them do it, so I know exactly how to do it too. The full walkthrough is over an hour and a half long, and we cover literally every step of the entire process. Sew this, press these seams, line this thing up with this thing, and before you know it, you have a finished uniform. So check that out if you're interested, and I'll catch you in the next video.